And welcome back to a fresh episode of the Business Growth Show. Excited to be joined by Robert Tadros today. Robert's a digital marketer, philanthropist, and investor based over in Melbourne. He's best known for founding Impressive, the fastest growing technology company in Australia, as recognized by Deloitte. Robert, a very warm welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Thank you, sir. It's good to be here on the other side of the world.
That's
I'm
it,
awesome.
man.
Really good from my end.
Other side in the pond, indeed. So, Robert, this is going to be an exciting episode. We're going to be talking all about how people can start a profitable e-commerce business in 2021. We're going to be diving into the nuts and bolts of it. Is it worth it now? Are we too late in the game to jump into ecom after everyone's been on the Corona wagon? We're going to talk about the tech that you need to invest in and how, most importantly, it's all good having a great website, but if no one can find it, we know it's as good as dust. So we need to make sure that we're marketing to the right customers. So throwing you in at the deep end, Robert, is it too late to get into ecom in 2021?
No, look, I don't think it's ever too late. I sincerely believe, having founded and built and sold a number of ecom businesses, that as long as you've got the right product and the right, I guess, the reason why you're even in business in the first place, as far as your purpose and where you're taking the business and what problem you're solving, you can never be too late. Okay. I think absolutely, I sincerely believe that currently in 2021, there's some great opportunities as far as certain product categories. And, if you're somewhat tech savvy or you know how to use Google, it's not very hard to find what those categories are. So I do believe that you can essentially enter the ecom market at any stage of the game. But there's a lot that you need to unpack before you dive straight in.
Yeah, and that's exactly it, and that's what we're diving into in today's episode. So reassuring to hear that it's not too late, just at this stage in the year. So all good. So in terms of getting started, Robert, how do we? I mean, say we've got a few things in our mind. Is there some things we should think about before we just dive in and pick any random product that we want to start selling online? Should we be thinking about things like what we're passionate about ourselves or what we actually like, or should we be looking into the markets, as in what's selling well right now? But are there any things that you've had experience with, both personally or with your clients, that you could perhaps give our audience pointers on in terms of picking the right products to sell?
Yeah, I think you touched on it there briefly, but for me, I've always been a big believer in loving what you do, because you will never work a day in your life, right? So if you take that concept and just apply it to getting into business and e-commerce more specifically, we think about there's a plethora of different categories and products and verticals that you can enter. But if you're sincerely, if you're trying to build this ecom brand and ecom business just for the sake of chasing the flashy things, the cars and the jet planes and everything else in between, it's probably not going to succeed, right? Yes, a lot do, but a lot also fail. However, if you're in it for the right person, for the right reasons, and you're sincerely trying to solve an issue or a product or a challenge, solve a challenge, it will succeed. Okay, I've been surrounded with a lot of ecom entrepreneurs, both here locally in Australia and internationally, and it always comes down to, why am I doing this? What is my purpose, right, for starting this brand in the first place? And from there, everything sort of falls into place, right? So you start to naturally attract the right audience and the right product, and find the right, I guess, location or geographic location where you can start marketing the brand. I think the key here is really, are you passionate about what you're about to get yourself into as far as the ecom game, and what problem are you solving?
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's where the longevity side of things comes into it. Hey, Robert, in terms of, if you're not too interested in what you're selling, whilst it might be a hugely profitable item, the chances are you could get bored. If things start playing up, if there's issues, then you may be less inclined to actually want to fix them, to actually work on them, because you're not too bothered about the product, you're not too bothered about what you're doing. So I guess unless you're selling tons and tons of it and it's a quick success, then you might lose interest.
Look, and a lot do, right? And that's the point here, right? Like, although I know, again, a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of ecom startups that have found and landed on certain products that do extremely well, and they make a lot of money. But
Yeah.
the key here is, are you truly passionate about what you're doing, and is there, are you, I guess, driving this business with conviction? Okay, and what is the end goal? Like, why are you in business in the first place? I think is the key question. So I like to always zoom out and go, why am I about to get into what I'm about to get into? What difference am I going to make?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And in terms of e-commerce in general, from your experience, is it something you can be successful? And when I say that, I mean actually drive a profit pretty quick, or is it more of a long-term strategy, which is something our guests talk about quite a lot in terms of marketing strategies, or is it somewhere in the middle? Is there no definitive answer?
I'll take option C. There is no definitive answer, right? Look, and it's for a number of reasons. I mean, I was my first ecom business. I was selling a product that was worth $39, right?
Okay.
So the cost per acquisition for me was almost double that amount, right? However, so a lot of business owners at that stage will think, well, if I'm spending, let's call it $80 to close a $39 product, or to sell a $39 product, well, that doesn't make any sense. However, for me, it was about, yes, I've got a high cost per acquisition initially,
Right.
but the long term here is, and which is what I'm looking at, is the individual that has bought, the consumer that bought the product will have to come back each month to buy the same product again. So now for me, it's not about the initial acquisition outlay, it's about what is the time life value of that client. And I think I sincerely believe in e-commerce specifically. Don't just try and go for the quick wins and be the one-hit wonder, right? Where you close one sale and you produce a crappy product that they're never going to come back and buy again. If you can, source or look at what it is that you're selling, and does it have longevity? Can we build a monthly recurring revenue model from it? That is typically where I see a lot of e-com businesses do really well and succeed.
Got it. So rather than thinking about the quick hits, the quick wins, going for something that, and that's probably something we'll touch on a bit later in terms of the marketing side of things and how to acquire customers, get them onto your site, get them converting into sales in the first place. But that's an interesting point, and something that people should probably consider, that you may not make profit instantly from customers, but if you have got an item, like you said, Robert, that they might be purchasing every month, then the chances are that will soon ramp up. And over time, the lifetime value of that customer could be extremely profitable.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right. And that has always been a key to my approach in building e-com businesses is, can I build a monthly recurring revenue model from my e-com store? Because I'm not interested in selling the item once. It's essentially, it's not a very sustainable model. So if you take that into consideration and ask yourself, if the product that I'm about to sell, products, will the customer come back and buy more? Or are they just buying it once and that is it? Now, again, there's certainly some products that have got a very high ticket item, and absolutely you can sell them month and there. It's about volume and getting as many customers to buy the product once, right? But I found, again, from my experience, again, for probably 12, 13 years now, the ones that do extremely well are the subscription-based or products that have that monthly recurring revenue attached to them.
Yeah. We all know there's plenty of stats out there that show it's a lot more expensive to acquire new customers than it is to sell to your existing. So once you've got them on board, as we'll chat through in a bit, there's so many tools and so many ways you can remarket to your existing customers and keep them coming back for more, as long as the product in the first place is something that you can keep offering to them. And moving forward, in terms of actual manufacturing and distribution, perhaps we could look at two angles, Robert. Perhaps we could look at MVP, where there's, perhaps I know with some products, there's the drop shipping model, where you don't necessarily have to do too much. You can perhaps get a website straight away, and then a third party will manage all the production and the distribution, all that shipping, all that good stuff for you. Or right on the other end of the scale, whether you set up a full operation yourself, whether that's creating the product, having your own warehouse, having a team of setting up all the products and all the shipping and managing the full logistics cycle, which is perhaps something a lot of companies grow into. Say we want to start with a minimum viable product MVP model. What are some things that we need to consider, Robert?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, Sam. I mean, I've played in both both games. I've run a drop shipping business, and some of the challenges that I face there is you really need to take, I mean, ultimately it's running a very lean operation, because essentially you're running on very, very slim margins. And I know, currently the market is absolutely saturated as far as drop shipping. It is a great model to get started. If you're keen to learn and understand, if you're new to e-commerce, it's probably a good place to start. Don't expect to make a lot of money initially, because as I said, your margins are very, very thin. And in addition to that, you're not selling a very unique product, right? So the consumer behavior now tells us that if I find a particular product, they're pretty savvy. They're going to go and Google it or have a look at, social if they get retargeted or another channel, and they're most likely going to find it a little bit cheaper somewhere else. Okay, and then it becomes a race to the bottom, which ultimately means you're eating into your margin. So it's a great way to get started. And look, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of very successful drop shipping businesses that have done extremely well. But on the flip side, owning your own, manufacturing your own product, again, that comes with its own challenges as far as where the item is coming from. Is a high manufacturing cost, high shipping costs. For instance, if it's coming from Asia into Australia or into the UK or into the US, that generally comes with a pretty hefty price tag. But the great thing is that there are ways to reduce some of those initial costs that can really eat into the overall profit of the product. I'm going to name drop, but a great partner of ours recently, Airwallex, which is an Australian fintech, which is it's actually a unicorn of a business. They've produced a very cost-effective product, if you like, that can really improve margins and streamline finances within an e-commerce business. Typically, through a bank, you're paying very high margins, very high fees, for transfers, a lot of foreign exchange. With these guys, it's like 90% cheaper. So there are ways to increase margin and still be able to deliver the right product, to the right person without having to spend a bucket load of money, drop shipping and again, as I said, eating into those margins. So there's no right or wrong, but again, from my experience, I found that if you've got the right tech stack, right, if I was to use that word, and the right partners, you'll be able to grow something pretty substantial by manufacturing your own product, and it becomes unique as well.
No, I mean, I get both sides of the coin. Do you think we should test the market first before we put a significant investment into things like manufacturing the products ourselves, setting up our own logistics chain, and all that good stuff? Because we could end up spending tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands, depending on what's entailed. And then if our product's not necessarily a good fit, or if it doesn't hit the market properly, even when we get into marketing, we've perhaps wasted a ton. So is there ways we can actually test the market, or is it not that easy?
No, look, absolutely. And hence I suggested that, starting as a drop shipping model is actually not a bad idea. As I said, for a number of reasons. It gives you the opportunity to test different categories, right? So you could launch an ecom site, drop ship a number of different categories, and really split test them against each other to see which one is actually more viable and which one's more, essentially more profitable. And once you've landed on a product or a category that does extremely well, you can now look at how you can finesse that product or make it better and get it manufactured and make it your own. So, I know, once again, a lot of really successful ecom businesses, that's how they've essentially started. So as a stepping stone, absolutely, I would recommend, drop shipping to just learn the game and understand what's involved. Land on a category or a particular, product or products that will do extremely well based on the testing, and then take them, refine them, redevelop them, and come up with something unique, which is going to give you a strategic edge in the market.
I like it. Okay, so we've got our products. We've got our system set up in terms of how we're going to manufacture them, produce them, and start shipping them. Now's the juicy part. We need the tech behind it. So we need a platform on which these products can sit on. And as many of us know, there's tons of different e-commerce web platforms. Do it yourself. Obviously, you can get an agency, you can get a freelancer, you can get a team in. What are some things that we should think about, Rob, before we jump into platforms like, obviously, Shopify is one of the big hitters. Then we've got a bunch of other platforms and in there that we can build e-commerce upon. What are some of the things we should think about before we just Google best e-commerce platform and pick one and jump away?
My number one, and I time and time again, this has occurred, number one in my business and externally as well, is location, location, location. Really put some time and effort into the TLD, or the domain name that you're registering. There's been so many examples, honestly, throughout my 13, touching on 14 years now, where local businesses have registered a local domain, whether it's .co.uk, .com.au, .com, probably not .com, and have, the store has gone bananas, right? Like, it's done extremely well. And then all of a sudden they're like, well, the world is my oyster. I want to go international. And
Right.
they're very restricted by the domain, right? Something very simple that isn't taken into consideration a lot of the time. They try and go and buy the .com because they want to go global, whether it's setting up, getting a little bit technical now, subfolders or subdomains, and they struggle because, number one, someone already owns the domain and they're probably trying to sell it back to them. And an example that I will never forget, one of my third client, local business here in Australia, .com.au, done extremely well, started getting onto the global stage. She tried to buy the .com. They were basically demanding 250,000 USD.
Wow. Okay.
So, and I could even see through just registered history that it was only bought, a year. I think it was a year pre her going internationally. So they, a lot of domain squatters, as I'm sure you probably agree, Sam, that they go and they buy the domains, they sit on them, and then they'll try and basically blackmail you and sell them back to you for a bucket load of money. And a lot of bigger businesses have no choice but to pay those prices, right? So something to really take into consideration is like, what is my intention with this business? Am I taking it global? And really own your domains. So critical.
Yeah, great point. And I know back in the day that another thing to consider with domains was also the SEO, so the search engine optimization and how well they can stand on Google.
Yes.
So at some stage, businesses were actually trying to weave in their main search terms into the domain itself. What are your thoughts on that, Rob? Or do you think you should just go with your brand name?
Yeah, look, I'm very big on building a brand, right? I know the days of, it's essentially when I was 17, there was those days when I was starting to black hat SEO and buying blackdressonline.com, right? And all I sold was black dresses. Now, this is not actually a true story, but that's what a lot of guys were doing. I think now it's more important than ever to build a brand, right, rather than just a website with a bunch of products, because there's nothing really differentiating you to your competitors. And the reality is the online space is becoming very fierce. It's very, very competitive, right? So building a brand, I believe, honestly, is probably one of the most critical pieces, I guess, that you need to solve and work on. And that, it ties into your domain name, it ties into your content, your personas, who you're speaking to. So it all sort of flows from or stems from that. So yes, it's a bit controversial. Some SEOs would argue that those name domains still work. I argue that sure, they might still work. However, there's nothing better than owning a brand rather than just a bunch of keywords, in a domain name.
Yeah, I see the point, and I love the long term thinking as well. Because I've had clients in exactly the same position where they've had maybe .co.uk sites, and then they've gone to purchase the .com or whatever the variant was they wanted, and then just like you say, you realize that it's already been registered. You speak to the broker, and they're like, "Yeah, I'd love to sell it to you. That'd be 100 grand, please." And then you fall off your chair and cry the rest of the day away. So yeah, definitely thinking long term, and probably even registering those domains just in case, and thinking about kind of where you're at, and also the fact that, like you mentioned, if you're going to move a website over domains, bearing in mind SEO and your Google rankings might take a hit. So just thinking about those bases, really.
Yeah, and look, you touched on a very good point there around SEO. I know, you mentioned Shopify earlier, which had some, I guess, some challenges with setting up multi stores or global stores. One of the challenges of Shopify at one stage was using this subdomain to try and I guess rank and optimize in certain locations on certain Googles. I believe that's now been fixed, and you can essentially set up subfolders. And I'm getting a little bit technical here, but that was a limitation on a platform, and has been a limitation on a number of platforms. So again, taking SEO into consideration from a technical perspective is probably just as important to consider when looking at what type of domain you're purchasing, and what the setup of the structure of the site and the sitemap is going to look like.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a bit of a tricky one, Rob. So we've covered the domain side of things. Now, in terms of actually nailing the platform, perhaps we don't necessarily have to name drop platforms, although you're more than welcome to if you wish, of ones yourself or your clients have had success with. But yeah, bearing in mind kind of search engine positions, bearing in mind we're going to want to market the site. We've already got our domain. Bearing in mind, we also need to think about whether we've got a small or a large product range. And I guess things like how easy this website is going to be to manage and update products on a day-to-day basis. What are some of the kind of considerations we need to really nail down before we start picking a platform that we're either going to build ourselves or contract a professional to get set up for us?
Yeah, so naturally, Sam, I mean, cost is a big one here, and budget. There are a number of platforms here are very much self-serve. You can, download a theme. They're pretty intuitive, and to be honest, one of them, if my mother can build one, I think anybody can. So they've made the user experience, I guess, and the user interface very simple, that you can essentially just go through a number of clicks, and next thing you know, you've got yourself a theme and you can start to upload products. Others are obviously a lot more complex and require developers, which in turn means you need a substantial budget. So my recommendation is always to start on the self-serve platforms, and I know we've spoken about Shopify a number of times here, so I don't mind name dropping them, because I believe they are great and they produce a good product. It's probably a good place to start. They've got some great themes, pretty easy to set up for a startup. If you're getting into the drop shipping game, though, it does make it a little bit more difficult. However, in saying that, there are certain platforms that offer purely drop shipping solutions from end to end. So you get on their platform, which they've invested quite heavily in. You can pick a theme. They'll help you with the products and the design and the user experience on the sites, and they'll pretty much support you from A to Z until launch. So again, with the rise of e-commerce, there's a lot of different solutions out there as far as which platforms and the functionalities and what they can provide.
Yeah, no, I like that, and I like the recommendation that you can obviously start building it yourself if you've got the time to do so. There's plenty of themes around there. Just in case, like you say, finding one that suits your needs, getting it set up, and then, like you say, you can always go to a specialist to grow it out as and when the time comes. Are there any other things we need to think about in terms of tech or integration, Rob? Whether that's payment gateways or whether that's other things that might slip our mind that actually are pretty crucial in terms of actually enabling customers to buy from us from our stores?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few. I mean, if we look at the tech stack, really, we've only spoken about the particular platform that the products are going to live, where the products are going to live. You need to really consider like you mentioned, the payment gateways. Which payment gateways will you use? I mean, you've got Apple Pay, you've got PayPal, you've got, as I mentioned, there's a number of different providers that can support, especially from a foreign exchange perspective. But it's something that really you need to take the time into understanding the fees, if there are any hidden fees, or how much are they clipping off each sale, because once again, that could really eat into margins. So it is critical to not just take something out of the box, to do your research and understand, all right, what is the most viable payment solution for me at the moment as a startup, and what do they offer as far as growth? So can they grow with me, or will I have to leave and go to another provider? So I think that's another one that is pretty important, and purely due to the amount of fees that a lot of them charge, which can, as I mentioned, eat into the margins.
Yeah, definitely, and they vary quite a bit in terms of payment providers and like you say, the percentages that they may take, how long they take to set up, and there's a lot of other things to consider. So some good points there, and this should link us nicely into the marketing. So before we jumpstart, before we invest a ton in paid ads, in search engine optimization, retargeting, influencer marketing, social media marketing, all these different channels we can go
TikTok
down.
And
yeah, exactly. Before we spend our life on TikTok and Clubhouse, what can we? I'm still not on there yet. What should we be doing in terms of a tracking perspective? so we can actually, all importantly, make sure we're actually measuring what's going on with our website before we invest a ton in actually driving customers to it.
Yeah, it's a very, very, very good question. For me, I mean, once again, I can't begin to mention the amount of times and conversations that I've had with startups that haven't got their analytics set up correctly, right? And they run these, they start these businesses, and I get it, right? There's a lot to do, but they neglect, or they forget about the data piece, which is probably the most important, right?
Yeah.
So my biggest piece of advice here is find someone, whether it's a freelancer or an agency, or even if you really want, you can watch some YouTube videos on how to set up an analytics platform. And I think you would agree, Google Analytics is probably the easiest to start with. Ensure that it has ecom functions, ecom tracking enabled, that it has been configured to a way that it can actually start to extract the right data, so that you can use it later on to understand product performance, category performance, top pages, exit rates, bounce rates, sessions. There's a ton of information in there that can really assist in, growing the store, understanding where you need to improve it, and how you can better support the customer once they're on the website.
Yeah.
It's definitely something that I would have to, I'd stress highly. It needs some attention.
No, exactly. I mean, I'm sure you've been the same, Rob, in terms of having clients that perhaps just didn't realize the power of analytics and the power of data, and then you've maybe taken over a web project, because I know I've certainly been there, and then you ask things like, how well is the website converting in terms of how many orders you're getting per day, per week, per month, and unfortunately they just don't know, and it's not something that's kind of widely pushed when you set up an e-commerce platform, perhaps on something with a theme or something like that. It's not something they necessarily push towards you or recommend you set up. So yeah, definitely getting Google Analytics set up is just the basic, just because then you can know what's going on with your site, you can know the traffic, you can know how well people are converting, you can know the channels that they're being sent to the site to, and there's so much more to it. I mean, we could do an episode on analytics itself.
Absolutely. Look, and one of the biggest trends we're seeing at the moment in 2021 is a lot of retailers are starting to invest quite heavily improving their online purchase paths, right? So what I mean by that is, is the experience personalized? Have you personalized the experience for each consumer as they land on the site? What is that enriched, I guess, purchase information, size guides, and instant chats, and we're seeing a lot of VR now, and and augmented reality. So, they're trying, a lot of retailers are starting to bring the in-store experience online. And although you'll never be able to replicate it exactly, but there are some really cool tech out there at the moment, some really cool tech that can be, implemented and deployed within a site to give that same experience, right? What is your returns policy? What's the customer experience around that? Really nailing even the fulfillment aspect of a store. And ultimately, why am I going to buy from you? So really looking at every single step of that conversion path and ensuring that we are providing value along the way to push them into the conversion. So you naturally can't do that if you haven't got the data. So, and as I mentioned before, e-commerce is becoming extremely competitive. So this is really what sets apart, good e-com stores to those that are very average.
Yeah, and on that note, Rob, I'm sure we've all been on an ecom store that's really frustrating. Perhaps it's really slow to load initially. Perhaps the design itself is an absolute struggle to navigate through in terms of finding the products you want to actually get to. Maybe the detail pages of products aren't very clear. Perhaps once you actually press add to your bag, it takes about 10 different steps of adding all your details. You've got to put even the primary school, the secondary school, and then the university you attended before you even get to checkout and putting your credit card details in. And then 10 minutes later, you've halfway through to placing your order. So are there any, I know we're coming up to time, but are there any big no's and big yeses in terms of that path from kind of viewing products to adding to your bag and getting the order done that people need to be really aware of, and big no's or big yeses that you've seen from experience?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's a lot, right?
Sure.
Even, the use of colors on different buttons, and, there's some psychology around that. But again, we could probably do another session on this. The big one for me is the checkout process, right? And I want, the viewers and listeners right now, think you have a product in your hand, you're about to go to the till in a shop and buy it, and then something happens, right? There's no one there. What do? You abandon it and you walk out, right? Because as consumers, we're just time poor and we can't be bothered, right? We'll go to the next store. So ensuring that you have a very fluid customer checkout process is probably one of the most important when it comes to e-commerce. Is the checkout page split over, say, 2 or 3 steps, or is it one big form that I look at and I'm like, you know what, this is too intimidating, I can't be bothered filling this out.
Yeah.
Right? What is the checkout experience on mobile versus desktop? So for me, one of the biggest areas to focus on as far as e-commerce is that checkout process. Am I making it easier for my customer to check out, or am I making it difficult? Do I have pop-ups in their face when they get to the checkout page, or am I making it very seamless and easy for them to convert? So something definitely to consider and pay attention to.
Yeah, I love how you've broken that down. Just, is it easy? And something I often say to people when they're building websites and stuff like that is, quite often, in terms of, this is me going off on a tangent, but in terms of home pages and things like that, quite often businesses want to put their own messaging, what they think they do, how great they are, and all this good stuff, when really you just need to simplify the message, as in what you do, how you can help people, and how people can do business with you. Doesn't really need to be any complex than that. And linking back to your e-commerce side of things in terms of the purchase process, we just want to make it as nice and easy for people to add to the bag, put in the details, and get the job done. Doesn't need to be anything more than that.
Exactly. Less is more.
Yeah.
Right. It's that simple.
So true.
The more cluttered that you make that checkout process and the more complicated, the higher the bounce rate and the exit rate, and they just simply will not convert.
Great points. Okay. All right. So we've got pretty much all our systems in place. We know that we need to track the data. We know that we need to keep an eye on what's going on with our site. How can we market this thing? Do we need to jump on every channel under the sun, Rob? So I hinted at Clubhouse. We need to get on LinkedIn. Do we need to get on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, SEO, paid ads, retargeting, display ads? What else do we need to be on?
Well, it comes down to budget, right? So, I mean, you can definitely throw the kitchen sink at it, but for any startup and in the ecom game, again, you are really trying to focus on those margins and not eat away into those margins too much. So, for me, a good way to start is always like a paid channel and an organic channel. We know content works, right? So SEO really has become content now. You're providing really good content on sites. You're looking at how-tos, if it's an e-commerce, or how your product can assist a certain individual. You can write some really good content around that, put a blog on the site, ensure that it is optimized, and obviously the technical components of a site need to be quite sound. So for me, my go-to, and call me a little bit biased, but SEO for me is still my number one channel as far as like the cheapest traffic that I can get. Right. And then I like to accompany that with a paid channel. So whether it's social or, say AdWords, again, it comes down to budget, but currently we are seeing some of the cheapest CPMs on social. So it's a really good opportunity to get onto the platform. And there's a number of reasons why, but we won't necessarily get into that.
Sure.
Social is a great channel. It allows you to drive, decent amount of traffic at a reasonable cost. They're not all very qualified, depending on which part of the marketing funnel or the sales funnel they're at, but it's a good place to start to build some awareness and to get some traffic to the site. Once they're there, you can start, you mentioned this earlier in the conversation, you can start to build some retargeting pools, right? Depending on behaviors and, which products they've clicked on, which categories and so on. And then later on, segment those out and drive certain creative to those individuals that have clicked on a particular category or a product to entice them to make the purchase. So for me, I think a good place to start is 2 channels. I don't like to throw all my eggs in one basket and just do one. That's my own personal opinion, because I think something happens, that channel goes down, and it does happen. I mean, At the moment, as I'm sure you're aware, in Australia, there's a threat that Google might close down our search engine.
I have seen that on the news. Yeah, a little bit worrying for yourself and clients.
It is worrying. So if Google decides to do that, well, guess what? Everybody that's spent a bucket of money on SEO and AdWords and so on, well, they're going to be on a world of hurt. So for me, it's about diversifying the risk and really just having multiple lead channel, multiple traffic channels into the site to as I said, that risk, and also amplify the amount of sales and conversions that you could receive.
Yeah. I love that, Rob. And I'm completely on the same page. And I think I've been pissing a lot of people off on LinkedIn, or I certainly did a while back, because I was saying when people mentioned to me, or people talk to me in conversation saying they got all their business from LinkedIn, I said, well, that's great. Really glad the channel's working for you, but essentially it's rented land. So
That's
LinkedIn
right.
can move the goalposts whenever they want. So one day you might be getting tens of thousands of reach from your posts, from your content, from your engagement. The next day that may drop, and all the inbound leads you're getting from LinkedIn go. What other channels have you got that bring in inbound opportunities, that start conversations, that bring in sales? So just thinking, just because something's working well right now, it doesn't mean a month, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years down the line, it's going to be performing well. So I love the split
And
test
it's
approach.
Yeah, and absolutely, like it's a very valid point you make, because I actually saw this. There was a particular time. I'll go back probably 7 or 8 years ago now, where e-commerce was really starting to trend, and Instagram. I call them these Instagram businesses were starting to emerge,
Yeah.
right? At the time where Instagram was just very easy to essentially make sales from. So a lot of these businesses grew on organic Insta, and then all of a sudden Instagram was like, you're gonna have to pay.
Just to wrap things up, Rob, really appreciate the chat. Thoroughly enjoyed having you on. So thanks very much for your time and sharing your e-commerce wisdom with us today. So on that note, please do tell us more about how people can learn from you, how people can connect with you, and the best way to get in touch.
Thank you, Sam. First, thanks for having me on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure. You can find me basically on LinkedIn. It's Robert Tadros. You can find me on Instagram. They're probably the two most active platforms. I have just jumped on Clubhouse, but it's very, very fresh, right? I haven't even had the time to look into it. But LinkedIn and Instagram are probably the two most active channels. Alternatively, look, I'm always happy to take on questions. I'm happy to assist. So feel free to drop me an email at robert@impressive.com.au. So there you have it. 3 channels that you can essentially contact me on.
Thanks so much, Rob. And we'll link to all those points of contact in the episode notes over at businessgrowth.marketing. And with that, I want to thank you once again, Rob. Really enjoyed the chat.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Cheers, dude. And if you enjoyed the show, be sure to hit subscribe wherever the heck you get your podcasts from. We interview business leaders here each and every week to provide actionable tips for marketing, growing a business, and growing your sales. And with that, we will catch you on the next episode. Thanks very much.